I'm 78 years old. I've buried a husband, survived a hip replacement, and once talked a judge out of a parking ticket using the county's own filing error. But I have never, not once in my life, been handed a printed eviction notice by a woman who doesn't know the difference between a deed and a lease. It was a Tuesday. I know because Tuesdays are when I make Harold's pot roast. Yes, I still make it, yes, for one person. And no, I don't want to talk about it. And I was standing at the kitchen counter measuring rosemary when Brittany walked in. She had that look, the one she gets when she's about to say something she practiced in the bathroom mirror. Her jaw was set, her hair was pulled back tight enough to lift her eyebrows, and she was carrying a piece of paper like it was a subpoena. She placed it on the table, right next to my tea. I've been thinking about this for a while, Eleanor. It's time. I picked up the paper. Laser printed. Times New Roman, 12-point, double-spaced. 3 bullet points. The first one said, "Notice, you have 48 hours to vacate the premises at 412 Maple Drive." The second listed 3 nursing homes in Westbrook with phone numbers and monthly rates. The third said, "This decision is final, and in the best interest of all parties." All parties. That was a nice touch. Kevin sat across from me. My son, the one I carried for 9 months, nursed through croup, drove to every little league game in a Buick that smelled like pine air freshener and broken promises. He was scrolling his phone, didn't look up, didn't flinch, just sat there like a man waiting for a bus that had nothing to do with him. "I know this is hard," Brittany said, "but it's the most practical. Sweetheart." I held up the paper. I filed court documents for 35 years. This wouldn't survive a spell check, let alone a courtroom. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "This isn't about courtrooms. This is about reality." "On that," I said, "we agree." I folded the notice. Once, lengthwise. Then again. Crisp edges. The way I folded. Every document that crossed my desk at the county clerk's office from 1967 to 2002. I placed it in my purse. Then I opened the small black address book I keep in the kitchen drawer. Harold's handwriting on the cover, faded but legible, because that man labelled everything like the world might forget who owned it, and found a number I hadn't dialed in 2 years. "David, it's Ellie Whitfield. I need you to pull the deed for 412 Maple Drive. Yes, today." Brittany stared at me. I stared at my tea. Kevin scrolled. I went upstairs after that. Not to my bedroom. I haven't had a real bedroom in this house for 3 years. Brittany turned mine into a guest room for her friend Janelle, who visits twice a year and leaves wet towels on the floor like some sort of amphibian. I sleep at the end of the hall now, in what used to be the sewing room. Twin bed. 1 nightstand. A window that faces the neighbour's fence. I sat on the edge of that twin bed and let the math run. 6 years since Harold died. 6 years since Kevin and Brittany moved in to take care of me. In that time, my daughter-in-law had redecorated the living room, replaced the curtains Harold picked out in 1998, moved our wedding photo from the mantel to a closet shelf, reassigned me to the smallest room in my own house, scheduled my kitchen access to a 2-hour window between 11 and 1, and let Harold's rose garden, the one he spent every Saturday morning, tending for 26 years, die. I counted these things the way I count everything. It's what I do. Some women journal. Some women pray. I inventory. Year 1, new curtains. Year 2, Harold's photo gone. Year 3, my bedroom gone. Year 4, my kitchen hours restricted. Year 5, the roses, dead. Year 6, a printed notice telling me I had 48 hours to leave. 6 years of erosion, and I'd allowed every inch of it. Because Harold always said family is everything, Ellie. Don't ever let money divide this family. And I believed him. I believed him while they boxed my memories into the attic, while they scraped my name off the mailbox. Oh yes, I noticed that, 3 months ago. The Whitfields, Kevin and Brittany. No Eleanor. While my granddaughter Lily asked me why I sleep in the tiny room and I told her Grammy likes it cozy. I lied to a 6-year-old to keep the peace. That should have been my first clue that the piece wasn't worth keeping. I stood up, opened the closet, pushed aside the winter coats nobody wears and the vacuum Brittany never uses. In the back corner, on the floor, sat the fireproof safe. Harold kept everything important in that safe. The deed, our marriage certificate, Kevin's birth certificate, Lily's birth announcement, the one I printed myself at the library, and framed because Brittany said she didn't have time, and a letter, Harold's handwriting, shaky near the end, to Ellie, 50 years of you telling me I'm wrong. You were right about most of it. I hadn't opened this safe in 6 years. I opened it that night. The deed was on top. Heavy paper. County seal. One name under grantee. Eleanor M. Whitfield. Just me. I held it under the lamplight. Read it twice, though I'd read 10,000 deeds in my career and could spot a clerical error at 40 paces. This one was clean. No lien, no transfer, no encumbrance, no Kevin, no Brittany. Well, Harold. I set the deed on the nightstand, next to my reading glasses and a glass of water I'd been drinking from the same spot for 52 years. Looks like procrastination finally paid off. Downstairs I could hear Brittany on the phone. Something about deposits and available beds. She was booking my future in a building that smelled like bleach and cafeteria meatloaf. I looked at the deed. Then I looked at the safe. Inside, Harold's letter sat on top of the marriage certificate, right where he'd left it. You were right about most of it. Most. Not all. I closed the safe. I didn't need the letter tonight. I needed the deed. And tomorrow, I needed David Chen. David Chen called at 9:14 the next morning. I know the exact time, because I was watching the clock above the stove, the one Harold hung crooked in 1979, and I never fixed, because fixing it felt like admitting he was gone. Mrs. Whitfield, I pulled the deed, recorded July 14th, 1972, at the Fairfield County Clerk's office. He paused. Your name, sole owner. No lien, no transfer, no encumbrance of any kind. I know, David. I was there when they recorded it. I was also working 3 desks away at the time. He laughed. David has a good laugh, the kind that sounds like it was expensive to develop. Do you want me to draft a notice to vacate? I looked out the window. Lily's plastic tricycle sat in the driveway, one wheel turned sideways, pink streamers hanging limp in the October air. Behind it, Harold's rose garden, 6 years of neglect, reduced to brown sticks in cracked soil. 2 things left behind. One by a child, one by a man, both waiting for someone to care. Not yet, I said. Give me a few days. Ellie. David dropped the formality. He only uses my first name when he thinks I'm making a mistake. You don't owe them kindness. Legally, you could have them removed. I know what I could do, David. I spent 35 years watching people do what they could do. Half of them regretted it. I took a breath. I need to be sure I'm not doing this because I'm angry. I need to be sure that when I make my move, it's the last one I'll ever need. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you sound like Harold. Harold, I said, would have changed the locks yesterday and asked questions never. That's why I handled the paperwork. Wednesday unfolded the way Wednesdays had for 6 years. Except now I was holding a secret that weighed more than the house itself. Brittany left for work at 8. She manages a chain of rental apartments on the east side of Westbrook, which I've always found poetic in the worst possible way. A woman who manages other people's homes while trying to steal mine. She didn't say goodbye. She never does. Kevin emerged around 10, wearing the same sweatpants he'd worn Monday. He poured cereal, the sugary kind Lily likes, and ate standing up, scrolling his phone with one hand. Good morning, Kevin. Morning, Mum. That was the full conversation. My son, who I taught to say please and thank you and I love you, Mom, before bed every night until he was 11, now communicated in single words between bites of Lucky Charms. I was washing the breakfast dishes when Lily came downstairs. 6 years old, hair like a dandelion, wearing the purple pajamas I bought her last Christmas, the ones with tiny cats on them, that Brittany said were not her style. But Lily wore every night anyway. Grammy! She wrapped herself around my legs like a vine. Are you making pot roast today? Not today, sweetheart. Grammy's taking a day off. She looked up at me with Harold's eyes, brown, serious, slightly too large for her face. Mommy said you're going on a trip. I set down the dish towel. Carefully. Did she? She said you're going to a special place where people take care of you. Like a hotel. Lily brightened. Can I visit? There are moments in life when the correct response is silence. This wasn't one of them. This was a moment that required me to kneel, and at 78, kneeling is a commitment my knees file a formal objection against, but I knelt, eye level with my granddaughter. Lily, Grammy isn't going anywhere. Do you hear me? Grammy is staying right here. Promise? I promise. She hugged me. Small arms, fierce grip. The kind of hug that means the person doing it doesn't know yet that the world breaks promises. I held on longer than she did. When she let go and ran off to watch cartoons, I stood up slowly, one hand on the counter, and I stood still for a long time. The dish towel was still in my left hand. I realized I'd been wringing it, twisting it so tight, the terry cloth had left a red line across my palm. I put the towel down, smoothed it flat, folded it in thirds, and I made a decision that had nothing to do with deeds or lawyers or 30-day notices. I made a decision because a 38-year-old woman had told my 6-year-old granddaughter that Grammy was being sent away to a special place. Like I was a dog being taken to a farm upstate. Brittany came home at 6:15. I was sitting in the living room, her living room now, with her grey couch and her abstract art, and the blank wall where our wedding photo used to hang. Have you started packing? She didn't sit down. She stood in the doorway with her coat still on, keys in hand, like someone who'd already mentally moved on. I'm considering my options. You have 24 hours left, Eleanor. I've put a deposit on Westbrook Manor. It's clean, it's close, and they have a memory care wing if she caught herself. Almost. If what, Brittany? If it becomes necessary. I looked at her. Really looked. She was thinner than she'd been last year. The roots of her hair showed dark beneath the blonde, an inch of truth she couldn't afford to cover this month. Her eyes moved the way they always did when she was calculating left to right, like she was reading a spreadsheet only she could see. She was scared. I could see that. Somewhere beneath the business language and the bullet-pointed notice and the nursing home deposits, Brittany Parsons from Moultrie, Georgia, was terrified. Of what exactly? I wasn't sure yet. But fear doesn't excuse cruelty. It just explains the shape of it. 24 hours, she repeated, and left. I sat in the living room until the light shifted. October light dies slowly in Connecticut. It doesn't set so much as retreat, pulling colour from the walls inch by inch until everything looks like an old photograph. Kevin never came downstairs. Lily's cartoons played somewhere above me, and I sat in a house that was mine legally, completely, unambiguously mine, and felt for the first time in 6 years, not angry, certain. Have you ever stayed somewhere longer than you should have, not because you couldn't leave, but because leaving felt like admitting you were wrong? I stayed in that living room, in that house, in that silence, for 6 years. Not because I couldn't fight, because fighting my own son felt like losing no matter who won. But Brittany had said memory care wing. She'd told Lily I was going to a special place, and she'd given me 24 hours like I was a tenant behind on rent. I wasn't a tenant. I was the landlord, and by tomorrow night, everyone in this house was going to know it. Thursday morning, Brittany left for work at 8. Kevin left at 9 job interview, he said, though his shirt was wrinkled and his tie had a stain shaped like Rhode Island. I didn't say anything. I've stopped ironing for people who don't see me. The moment the driveway was empty, I got to work. I started in the master bedroom, their bedroom now, the one Harold and I shared for 46 years, the one where Kevin was conceived during a thunderstorm in June of 1981, and where Harold died on a quiet Sunday in March, holding my hand, watching the light through the curtains. I brought a notepad. Blue ink. My penmanship hasn't changed since 1967, Small, upright, every letter closed. The county trained that into me. Open letters cause recording errors. Recording errors cause lawsuits. Lawsuits cause headaches. I don't like headaches. Bed frame ours, purchased Ethan Allen, 1,989. Mattress theirs, Casper, delivered 2020. Dresser Harold's mother's, Walnut, circa 1963. Nightstand IKEA, Brittany, 2019. Lamp mine, rug theirs, curtains theirs, replaced mine year 1. I moved through the house room by room, floor by floor, the way I'd moved through filing cabinets for 3.5 decades, systematic, complete, without sentiment. Sentiment comes later. First, the record, living room, their couch, their art, their throw pillows, my walls, my floors, my ceiling that Harold replastered himself in 1994 after the leak, swearing words I pretended not to hear while Kevin, age 12, sat at the bottom of the ladder handing him tools and laughing. Kitchen, my pots, my grandmother's cast iron skillet, the one Brittany put in the dishwasher once, and I nearly filed a missing persons report. Their coffee maker, their knife block, my stove, my counters, my window that looks out over a garden that used to bloom every May and now looks like a small cemetery for plants. I opened the front door and walked to the mailbox, looked at it the way you look at evidence. The Whitfields, Kevin and Brittany. Vinyl letters, professionally done. No Eleanor. My name erased from my own mailbox on my own property, on a street I've lived on since Lyndon Johnson was president. I wrote it down, underlined it twice. By noon I had 14 pages. Every object, every change, every small erasure of Eleanor Whitfield from 412 Maple Drive. 14 pages of a woman disappearing in plain sight. I closed the notepad, sat at the kitchen table, and realized that the inventory wasn't about the objects at all. It was about the pattern. Each change was small. Each one alone was nothing. A curtain, a photo, a room reassignment. But together, in sequence, on paper, they told a story even a jury could read. Year by year, my daughter-in-law had renovated me out of my own life. I cooked dinner that evening. Pot roast Harold's recipe, though I've improved it over the years in ways I would never tell him if he were alive, because marriage is the art of strategic omission. Brittany came home and stopped in the doorway. Her nose twitched. She looked at me the way you look at a trap you're not sure is loaded. You're cooking. I am. You haven't cooked dinner in 2 years. Since you put me on a kitchen schedule like a cafeteria worker at a middle school. But tonight, I felt like pot roast. I set the table, 4 places. The good china, my mother's, 1,958. The set Brittany wanted to donate to Goodwill last Thanksgiving. Sit. She sat. Kevin sat. Lily climbed into her booster seat and clapped. Grammy's cooking. Brittany watched me serve, watched me smile, watched me pour water for everyone, and ask Kevin about his interview, and compliment Lily's crayon drawing of a house, our house, purple with a yellow door, and a stick figure Grammy standing in the garden. Brittany thought I was making a farewell dinner, a going-away meal before I packed my bags and drove to Westbrook Manor. She was half right. It was a farewell dinner, just not mine. I was making a last supper. There's a difference, asked Judas. This is good, Mom, Kevin said. He looked up from his phone for the second time that week. Progress. Thank you, Kevin. I passed the potatoes. I'm glad you noticed something. He blinked. Brittany's fork paused. Lily ate happily, unaware that every adult at the table was holding something sharp beneath the surface. That night, after Lily was asleep and the house was quiet, I sat on my twin bed and called David. Draft the notice, I said. 30 days to vacate. Understood. I'll have it ready by David. One more thing. I paused. Not for drama, for precision. Use the same format she used. Times New Roman, 12-point, double-spaced. The line was quiet for 3 seconds. Then David Chen, attorney at law, 61 years old, $400 an hour, too, laughed. The kind of laugh you only hear from someone who has practiced restraint their entire professional life and just watched it slip. Ellie. For that line, this one's on the house. Nothing in this situation is on the house, David. The house is mine. That's the whole point. He cleared his throat. Got professional again. Now, about the locks. You're within your rights as sole owner to rekey the property. However, if Kevin and Brittany have established residency, which after 6 years, they arguably have there's a legal grey area, a judge could view it as constructive eviction. What do you recommend? I recommend we send the 30-day notice first. Simultaneously, I'll file a formal request with the court for possession. If they don't leave voluntarily within 30 days, we pursue legal eviction, the lock change. He hesitated, aggressive but defensible, especially given the verbal threats, the coercion regarding Lily, and the fact that they have no lease, pay no rent, and frankly printed a fake eviction notice on a laser printer. Saturday morning, I said. Brittany has brunch at 10. Kevin goes to the gym or whatever Kevin does. I'll be at church. The locksmith comes at 9. You've thought this through. David, I spent 35 years processing other people's property disputes. I've seen what happens when you act on emotion. I've seen what happens when you wait too long. And I've seen what happens when you get the timing exactly right. I looked at the notepad on my nightstand. 14 pages, 6 years, 1 deed. Saturday, 9 a.m., 3 locks. And David? Yes? Mail the notice to arrive Saturday afternoon. So when she comes home and the key doesn't work, the explanation will be waiting in the mailbox. I smiled. The mailbox with my name on it. I'm having that fixed too. I hung up, set the phone on the nightstand next to the notepad, next to the deed, next to my reading glasses, a small fortress of paper and intention. I went to bed that night and slept better than I had in 6 years. Not because I was happy, because I was finished being patient. And patience, I've learned, is only a virtue when the people around you deserve it. Friday morning, 1 day before the locks, I was coming out of the bathroom when Brittany caught me in the hallway. She must have been waiting. Her bedroom door was already open, coat on, keys in hand, but she hadn't gone downstairs yet. Positioned, that's the word. She was positioned like a woman who'd rehearsed this in her head during her shower. I want to be clear about something, Eleanor. I waited. When someone tells you they want to be clear, what they mean is they want to be threatening, but need a professional-sounding opening. I spoke to a family attorney yesterday. Grandparents don't have automatic visitation rights in Connecticut. She took a step closer, close enough that I could smell the coffee on her breath, and the hairspray she uses, the cheap kind, salon name on a drugstore bottle. If you fight this, if you make this difficult, you will never see Lily again. I will move to Oregon. I will move to Alaska. I will move wherever I need to move to make sure you spend whatever years you have left staring at a phone that doesn't ring. She held my eyes. She wanted me to flinch. I didn't flinch, but I won't pretend it didn't land. It landed the way things land, when they're aimed at the one spot you can't armor the soft part, the part shaped like a 6-year-old in purple pajamas who calls you Grammy and thinks you hung the moon. Brittany brushed past me. Her shoulder caught mine. Not enough to hurt, just enough to say I can. She went downstairs. The front door opened, closed. Her car started. I stood in the hallway for a long time. The heating vent hummed. Lily's bedroom door was shut. She was at school, thank God, because I don't know what my face looked like at that moment and I didn't want her to see it. Grandparents don't have automatic visitation rights in Connecticut. She was wrong about that, actually. Connecticut passed a statute, Section 46B59, allowing grandparents to petition for visitation if the court finds it's in the child's best interest. I know this because I processed 14 of those petitions during my last decade at the clerk's office. I know the filing fee. I know the judge's preferences. I know the language that works and the language that doesn't. But knowing the law doesn't stop your hands from shaking. I called Ruth. Ruth Abernathy, 74, retired English teacher. Been my friend since we both served on the library board in 1989 and bonded over a shared dislike of the chairman's toupee. She said, "What?" Ruth's voice could strip paint. "She threatened you with Lily? That woman has the moral compass of a parking meter." Ruth. No, Ellie. I have sat in your kitchen and watched that girl rearrange your house like she's staging a property for sale. I've watched you smile through it because Harold told you family comes first. Harold was a good man, but Harold is dead, Ellie, and dead men don't get to make rules for the living. That's a terrible thing to say. It's an honest thing to say, and you've been surrounded by dishonest people for 6 years, so I understand if it stings. She took a breath. I heard her tea kettle in the background. Ruth drinks Darjeeling, always has. Judges anyone who drinks coffee afternoon. What do you need? I need to know I'm not making a mistake. You are not making a mistake. You are making a correction. There's a difference. I was quiet. Ellie, Lily will love you from any address. Brittany will hate you from any address. At least be hated in your own home. When did you get so wise? I taught 11th grade English for 32 years. I've read every tragedy. The ones where the hero acts too late are always worse than the ones where she acts too early. She paused. Do you need me to come over? I'll bring casseroles. And a crowbar, in case the casseroles don't work. I laughed. The first real laugh in I couldn't remember how long. It came out rusty, like a door that hadn't been opened in years. Tomorrow, I said. After it's done, bring the casseroles. Leave the crowbar. Your loss. It's a good crowbar. I found the budget that afternoon. I wasn't snooping, I was doing Kevin's laundry, which I know makes me pathetic, and I know I should have stopped doing it years ago, but some habits are load-bearing walls. You pull them out, and the whole structure shifts in ways you're not ready for. The paper was crumpled in the back pocket of his khakis. The ones he wore to last week's interview that smelled like a sports bar. I almost threw it in the wash. Almost. But 35 years of handling documents teaches you to check pockets the way doctors check pulses automatically, without thinking, because the one time you don't is the time it matters. I unfolded it on the kitchen counter, smoothed the creases with the flat of my hand. Brittany's handwriting. I'd recognize it anywhere aggressive slant, all capitals, the kind of penmanship that grabs the page by the throat. Sell house est. $420K minus Eleanor's share. Nursing home deposit. $5,000 remaining. $415,000 down payment Fairfield property. $100,000 investment portfolio. $315,000. I read it twice. Not because I didn't understand it, I understood it the way you understand a punch after it's already landed. $5,000. 52 years in this house. 52 Christmases. 52 springs watching Harold's roses bloom. Lily's first steps in this kitchen. Kevin's crayon marks still on the doorframe of the pantry, the ones I refused to paint over because they measured the years he was small enough to need me. All of it reduced to a line item between a nursing home deposit and a real estate investment. She wasn't trying to put me in a home because she was worried about my health. She was trying to clear me out, like outdated inventory, to unlock the equity in a house she didn't own, had never paid for, and couldn't spell the legal term for. I folded the paper, carefully, put it in my purse, right next to the 48-hour notice. At what point does loyalty to family become betrayal of yourself? I'd been asking that question for 6 years, standing in that kitchen, holding a crumpled piece of paper worth $415,000 of someone else's plan for my life. I finally had my answer. The answer was a number. 5,000. That's what my loyalty was worth to them. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., 3 locks, and one very expensive piece of paper in Times New Roman, 12-point, double-spaced with a county seal that Brittany's laser printer couldn't dream of. Saturday, 9 a.m. The locksmith's name was Eddie. He was about 40, built like a vending machine, and arrived in a van with precision lock and key stenciled on the side, which I appreciated, because precision is underrated in both locksmithing and revenge. 3 locks? He looked at his clipboard. Front, rear, and garage side entry. Your attorney called it in. That's correct. Domestic situation? I looked at him. He was trying to be delicate, which for a man his size was like watching a dump truck parallel park. You could say that. He worked fast. I stood in the kitchen and listened the old hardware coming out, the new cylinders going in, the drill whining through the doorframe like a dentist on a Tuesday. Each lock took 12 minutes. I counted. When you've spent your life counting, you don't stop just because the numbers are about revenge. At 9:36, Eddie handed me 3 new keys on a ring. Heavy, brass, still warm from the cut. All done, ma'am. You want me to test them? I trust the work, Eddie. I don't trust much else these days, but I trust good hardware. He smiled. Left. The van pulled out of the driveway, and then it was just me. Me and 3 new locks and a kitchen that smelled like metal shavings and Earl Grey. I set the keys on the table, right where Brittany had placed her notice 5 days ago. Same spot, same surface, different authority. Next to the keys, I placed one certified copy of the deed to 412 Maple Drive, obtained from the Fairfield County Clerk's office, my old colleagues, one of whom said, "Ellie, we miss you." And I said, "I miss you too, Barbara. Now stamp this, please." One legal notice to vacate, drafted by David Chen, Esquire, 30-day timeline, proper service format, Times New Roman, 12 point, double-spaced, and one crumpled budget calculation in Brittany's handwriting, smoothed flat, showing exactly what my 52 years in this house were worth to her, $5,000. Right there, between the deed and the notice, like a confession between 2 verdicts. I stepped back, looked at the table the way I used to look at a completed filing, everything in order, everything accounted for, every document in its place. It should have felt like victory. It didn't. It felt like surgery. Necessary, precise, and nothing you'd celebrate. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't comfort. The kind that reminds you of what's missing. No Lily running down the stairs. No cartoons through the ceiling. No Kevin opening the refrigerator for the 4th time like something new might have appeared since the last check. Just me, 78 years old, standing in my own kitchen, in my own house, alone. I don't know why I walked to the refrigerator. Habit, maybe, or something less mechanical. The drawings were still there, held up by magnets from places we'd visited, places Brittany hadn't bothered to remove because she didn't care about magnets from Mystic Seaport and Cape May. Lily's drawing, the one from last week. Purple house, yellow door, green grass that looked like hair, and 2 stick figures holding hands in front of the garden, one small, one tall with curly grey lines for hair. She'd written at the top, in the careful crooked letters of a first grader, "Grammy and me." I took it off the refrigerator, held it with both hands, and for the first time since Tuesday, the first time since the notice, the deed, the threat, the budget, the locks, I cried. Not the kind you see in movies. Not shoulders shaking, not sounds escaping. The quiet kind. The kind that starts behind your eyes and fills your chest, like water rising in a basement, slow and heavy and impossible to pump out. I stood there holding a crayon drawing and cried for the boy I raised who became a man I don't recognize. For the 6 years I gave to a lie Harold wrote, and I obeyed. For the roses I let die because I was too tired to tend anything else after tending everyone. I cried for 3 minutes. I know because the kitchen clock ticked the crooked one. Harold hung, and I counted. Even crying I count. It's a sickness or a gift. I've never decided which. Then I stopped. Wiped my face with the dish towel. Folded it in thirds. I went to the safe. Took out Harold's letter. Read it one more time, standing by the window where October light made everything look like a memory even while you were living it. To Ellie, 50 years of you telling me I'm wrong. You were right about most of it. Harold. I spoke to the letter because speaking to the dead is only strange if you expect them to answer. You were wrong about one thing. Family isn't everything. Not when family treats you like nothing. I put the letter back, closed the safe. And the clock is crooked. It's always been crooked. I just didn't want to fix it while you were watching. I placed Lily's drawing back on the refrigerator. Center magnet. Cape May. Then I sat down, drank my tea, and waited. Because the hardest part wasn't changing the locks. The hardest part was what would happen when they came home and found out that home had never been theirs to begin with. Saturday, 2:14 p.m. I know the time because I was sitting in the kitchen, and I'd been watching that crooked clock since noon, counting the minutes, the way I've counted everything my whole life, as if the numbers could protect me from what was coming. I heard the car first, then the door, then the key scraping, turning, failing, a pause, another try. The back door next, I could hear her heels clicking across the patio. Then the garage side entry. 3 locks, 3 failures. 3 small satisfactions I am not proud enough to deny. Then the knocking. Eleanor, Eliana, open this door. I stood, smoothed my cardigan, walked to the front door and opened it myself because I wanted this face to face. I've never been the kind of woman who hides behind locked doors. I'm the kind who locks them and then opens them on her own terms. Brittany stood on the porch. Her brunch face was gone, the composed, lipsticked, I'm in control mask she wears to eggs. Benedict with her friends. What was left looked like a woman who'd just been told the building she managed had been condemned. What did you do? Come in, I said. There's something on the table. She pushed past me. Kevin was pulling into the driveway. He must have gotten her call. I held the door for him too. He walked in the way. He walks into everything. Late, confused, and hoping someone else would explain. Brittany stood at the kitchen table, staring. The deed, the notice, the budget, the keys, all arranged the way I'd left them. Neat, centered, deliberate. The way you set a table for guests you've been expecting. What is this? Her voice had an edge I hadn't heard before. Not anger, something underneath it. Something younger. Times New Roman, I said. 12-point, double-spaced. I let that land. I thought you liked that format. She picked up the deed. Read it. Her lips moved the way people's lips move when they're trying to make words cooperate with a reality that won't hold still. This can't be right. Kevin. She turned to him. Kevin, you said the house was... I never said anything about the house. Kevin's voice was barely audible. He was standing by the door like a man looking for exits. I assumed Dad put both their names. You assumed? The house was purchased in 1972, I said, by Harold Whitfield, using funds from his employment at Pratt & Whitney. Recorded at the Fairfield County Clerk's office under one name, mine. I know this because I was working 3 desks away when the deed came through. I remember because Harold brought me flowers that afternoon. Daisies, not roses, because roses were for the garden and daisies were for me. Brittany stared at me, then at the notice. She read it the way someone reads a diagnosis. 30 days? 30 days, which is 28 more than you gave me. Then she saw the budget, her handwriting, her numbers, her $5,000 line item for Eleanor Whitfield's 52 years. Her face changed. Not shame, I don't think Brittany has arrived at shame yet. She's still 3 exits away. Something closer to exposure. The face of a woman whose private arithmetic has just been read aloud in a room she doesn't control. Where did you get that? Your husband's pocket. I was doing his laundry. Which, for the record, I will also be stopping. Brittany recalibrated. I could see it happening. The jaw tightened, the eyes narrowed, the shoulders pulled back. ENTJ in crisis mode. When the plan fails, build a new plan. When the new plan fails, go nuclear. If you do this, she said, you will never see Lily again. I will take her so far from this house. Brittany, stop. Kevin. Kevin said it. My son, who hadn't said a complete sentence of resistance in 6 years, said stop. Not loudly, not bravely. More like a man pulling a fire alarm because the building is already burning and he's run out of options. But he said it. Brittany turned on him. She's stealing our home, Kevin. It's... He swallowed, looked at the deed on the table, looked at me. It's Mom's home, Brittany. It always was. For 3 seconds, nobody spoke. Brittany looked at Kevin the way you look at a wall that's just moved. Kevin looked at the floor, and I looked at my son and thought, that's the most you've done for me in 6 years, and it's still not enough. But it's something. You knew. I said it quietly. You knew this was my house. You always knew. And you sat at this table and scrolled your phone while your wife handed me a printed notice to leave. Kevin opened his mouth, closed it. His eyes were wet. But wet eyes without action are just weather. Brittany grabbed her phone, dialed. I'd like to report that I'm being illegally locked out of my home. She was pacing, voice climbing. 412 Maple Drive. My mother-in-law changed the locks while she listened. I could hear the dispatcher's voice, tinny, professional, bored. Is the property in your name, ma'am? It's my husband's family's property. Ma'am, is the property owner present and asking you to leave? Brittany looked at me. I looked back. I didn't nod, didn't gesture. Just sat at my kitchen table in my kitchen in my house and drank my tea. Yes, Brittany said. That's a civil matter, ma'am. You'll want to contact an attorney. She hung up. Stood in the middle of the kitchen holding her phone like a weapon that had jammed. And for the first time since I'd known her, Brittany Whitfield had nothing to say. They left at 4. Brittany packed 2 suitcases in 11 minutes, I counted. Because that's what I do. And because I wanted to know exactly how long it takes to leave a house you spent 6 years trying to steal. Kevin carried Lily's bag, the purple one with the cat keychain. He didn't speak to me. He didn't look at me. He loaded the car like a man moving through fog. Lily was in the back seat. I stood at the front door, my front door, and watched through the glass. She saw me, pressed her hand against the car window. Bye, Grammy. Small hand. Fogged glass. The streetlight caught her face, Harold's eyes, Kevin's chin, and a smile that didn't know yet what was happening. I raised my hand, waved, held it there until the car turned the corner and the taillights disappeared behind the Hendersons' maple tree. Then I lowered my hand, went inside, locked the door, all 3 locks, one by one, the way you close chapters in a book you're not sure you want to finish. The house was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Lily's drawing hung on the door. Grammy and me. I won the house. I lost the sound of small feet running down the hallway at 7 in the morning. That night, the silence wasn't peace. It was a bill. And I wasn't sure yet what the interest would be. Sunday morning. The house was so quiet, I could hear the furnace thinking. I made tea, sat at the kitchen table. Same chair, same mug, same window. 52 years of the same morning, except this one had 3 new locks and no one to keep out. The clock ticked, crooked. I should have been relieved. I should have been sitting there with my Earl Grey feeling like a woman who'd reclaimed her castle. Instead, I felt like a woman sitting alone in a kitchen that was too big and too clean and too empty, drinking tea that tasted the same as it had when this table seated 4. The thing about winning is nobody tells you what to do with the quiet afterward. I looked at the chair where Kevin used to sit, the one with the slightly uneven leg that Harold shimmed with a folded matchbook when Kevin was 8. He used to tilt it on purpose back and forth, until I'd say, Kevin Michael Whitfield, that chair has 4 legs for a reason. He'd grin. Harold would grin. I'd pretend to be angry, because pretending to be angry at people you love is one of the great pleasures of motherhood. And now I was genuinely angry at people I love, and there was no pleasure in it at all. Here is the truth I sat with that Sunday morning, the one I'd been circling for 6 years the way you circle a drain slowly. Then all at once, I created Kevin, not Brittany, not the economy, not the culture of entitlement or the failure of modern parenting or whatever Dr. Phil would call it. Me. I created the man who sat at this table scrolling his phone while his wife evicted his mother. When Kevin was 10 and broke the neighbor's window with a baseball, I paid for it. When he was 16 and failed algebra, I talked to the teacher. When he was 22 and dropped out of college, I said it's okay. You'll find your path. When he was 30 and needed a co-signer for a car he couldn't afford, I signed. When he was 36 and married a woman who wore ambition like armor, I smiled and made pot roast and said nothing when she rearranged my living room. I raised a boy who never once had to sit in the wreckage of his own decisions. Every time the floor cracked, I patched it before he felt the drop. Every time the consequence came, I intercepted it like a mother catching a ball before it hits her child's face. And now he was 42, unemployed, spineless, sitting in a hotel room with a wife who was calculating how to sell a house that wasn't hers, and a daughter who thought Grammy was going on a trip. I raised that. I raised the kind of man who needs two women to fight over him while he looks at Instagram. And the worst part, the part that sat in my chest like a stone I couldn't cough up, was that I did it out of love. Love is not always kind. Sometimes love is a 20-year mistake disguised as sacrifice. I went to the safe. Not for the deed this time, I knew where the deed was. I went for Harold's letter. I sat on the edge of the bed, the twin bed, the tiny room, though I suppose I could sleep in the master bedroom now if I wanted. I didn't want. Not yet. Some rooms need to be earned back slowly, the way you re-enter a house after a flood. One room at a time. Check the foundation first. To Ellie, 50 years of you telling me I'm wrong. You were right about most of it. Most. I'd always read that word as affection. Harold being Harold stubborn, even in love letters, conceding ground with a wink, but sitting there Sunday morning, alone in a house I'd won back from my own family, I heard it differently. Most. Not all. Harold knew. He knew family is everything was too simple. He knew it the way you know the stove is hot, but you say it anyway because it sounds right, and because the alternative, admitting that family can be the thing that burns you, is too frightening to say out loud. He couldn't fix it. He was Harold good at roses, good at hardware, good at holding my hand during thunderstorms, but not good at admitting he'd built a philosophy on sand. So he left me a letter. One word most that gave me permission to disagree with him after he was gone. You old fox, I said to the empty room. You knew. You just couldn't say it. I folded the letter, put it back in the safe, and I made a decision. Not about the house, not about the locks, not about Brittany, about Kevin. I was done protecting him from consequences. Not because I stopped loving him, I will love Kevin Michael Whitfield until the last synapse in my 78-year-old brain fires its final thought. But love without honesty is just upholstery. It looks nice. It covers the damage. And eventually, the springs come through anyway. Kevin needed to sit in the wreckage. For once in his life, he needed to feel the floor crack and have no one there to patch it except himself. I picked up the phone, dialed Kevin's cell. He answered on the fourth ring, which meant he debated not answering for 3. Mom, Kevin, I want you to come to the house. Tuesday morning, 9 o'clock. Bring Lily. Mom, Brittany says. I'm not asking what Brittany says. I'm telling you what I need. For once in your life, Kevin, do what your mother asks. Not what your wife tells you. Not what's easiest. What's right. The line was quiet. I could hear a television in the background, a hotel room. My son, 42 years old, living in a Hampton Inn because the house his mother owns now has locks he can't open. Okay, Mom. Tuesday, 9 o'clock. Don't be late. Should I bring anything? Bring Lily. And bring yourself. The version of yourself that used to tilt his chair at this table and grin at me. I'd like to see that person again, if he's still in there. I hung up, set the phone down. Tuesday, the same day Brittany gave me the notice, 1 week exactly. Some days choose themselves. If your child broke your heart, would you give them one more chance knowing they might break it again? Hold that thought, because Tuesday morning I was about to find out. Tuesday morning, 1 week exactly. I made pot roast. I know 9 a.m. is not pot roast hour, but I've been making Harold's pot roast on Tuesdays for longer than Brittany Parsons has been alive. And if there's one thing I've learned in 78 years, it's that comfort food doesn't check the clock. The kitchen smelled like rosemary and bay leaf, and something I couldn't name, something that had been missing for 6 years, and had come back overnight, the way warmth returns to a house when you finally close the window you forgot was open. I set the table, 2 places, the good china, my mother's 1,958, the set that survived a cross-country move, 3 Thanksgivings with Harold's brothers, and Brittany's annual suggestion that we donate it to Goodwill. At 9:07, the front door opened. I'd given Kevin a key, 1 key, the front door only, because trust is rebuilt 1 lock at a time. Grammy! Lily hit me at knee level. Full speed, arms wide, face buried in my cardigan. I bent down my back, filed its usual complaint, and I ignored it the way I ignore most things that try to slow me down, and held her. She smelled like hotel shampoo and syrup, and something purely Lily, something no laboratory could manufacture, and no distance could dilute. Grammy, I missed you so much. Mommy said we were on vacation, but the hotel didn't have a pool, and Daddy was sad the whole time. Well, I said, stroking her hair, Grammy missed you too, and Grammy's house has something better than a pool. What? Potrost. She gasped like I'd said Disneyland. 6-year-olds are the only honest audience left in the world. Kevin stood in the doorway. He looked like he'd slept in his clothes, which he probably had. His eyes were red. His jaw was tight. He held Lily's purple backpack, the one with the cat keychain, like it was the only thing keeping him vertical. Hi, Mom. Sit down, Kevin. There's pot roast. He looked at the table. The china. The deed copy still sitting between the salt and pepper shakers, because some documents earn a permanent place at the table. Mom, is the deed part of breakfast? Consider it the menu. I poured him coffee. Real coffee, not the pod nonsense Brittany bought. French press. Harold's method. Lily, sweetheart, go play in the living room. Grammy and Daddy need to talk about grown-up things. Boring things? Very boring things. She skipped off. I heard the television turn on cartoons. The good kind. The kind that don't try to sell you anything. I waited until I could hear her laughing. Then I sat down across from my son. Kevin, I'm going to say this once. He put down his coffee. His hands were shaking. Good. Some things should make your hands shake. Your wife gave me 48 hours to leave my own house. A house I've lived in since before you were born. A house your father bought with money he earned, working double shifts at the plant for 23 years. Double shifts, Kevin. Holidays. Weekends. He missed your 3rd birthday because he was pulling overtime so we could make the down payment on this kitchen you're sitting in. Kevin's jaw worked. He was trying to speak. I didn't let him. And you sat at this table, and scrolled your phone. You didn't say, Mom, are you okay? You didn't say, Brittany, that's enough. You didn't say anything. You just scrolled. Like I was a commercial. You were waiting to end. Mom, I didn't know what to. You didn't know what to do? I kept my voice level. ISTJ doesn't shout. ISTJ presents evidence. I raised you, Kevin. I sat at every baseball game, every school play, every parent-teacher conference where Mrs. Delacroix said you weren't applying yourself, and I said, he just needs time. I made excuses for you when you dropped out of college. I co-signed your car. I let you and Brittany move into my home when you said it was to take care of me. I paused. Let the silence do what silence does, fill every corner of the room until there's no space left to hide. In 6 years of living under my roof, do you know how many times you asked if I was okay? I counted, Kevin, because that's what I do. The number is 0. His eyes were full. His chin trembled. He looked so much like Harold in that moment, the same way Harold looked the night Kevin was born, overwhelmed by something too big to hold and too important to drop. I placed the budget on the table. Brittany's handwriting. The numbers. Your wife calculated my life at $5,000. 52 years. 5,000. That's less than your car payment. I slid it toward him. And you let her. Kevin read it. I watched his face change, not all at once, but in layers, the way paint peels when you finally see what's underneath. Confusion. Recognition. Shame. He looked up. His eyes met mine, and whatever wall he'd built between himself and this moment, the phone screen, the avoidance, the 6 years of strategic cowardice, it came down. Kevin stood up, walked around the table, and knelt. Not gracefully, not like a man in a movie. He knelt the way a 42-year-old man with bad knees and worse judgment kneels on a kitchen floor. His mother has mopped every Sunday for half a century, clumsily, heavily, like someone who has never done this before because no one ever required it of him. "Mom," his voice cracked, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have said something. I should have stopped her. I put my hand on his head. Old hand. His hair was thinner than I remembered. When did that happen? When did the boy with the thick brown cowlick become this man with the thinning crown and the trembling shoulders? You should have, I said. But you didn't. And I can't keep setting myself on fire to keep you warm, Kevin. I've been doing it your whole life, and it hasn't made either of us warmer." He made a sound. Not a word, something before words, something from the part of us that existed before language. His forehead dropped to my knee. My son, crying on the kitchen floor, in the house where I taught him to walk. I let him stay there. Some silences need to be long. Some floors need to be knelt on. Then I lifted his chin, made him look at me. "But I'm not going to cut you out of my life the way your wife tried to cut me out of my home, because that would make me her. And I have spent 78 years becoming Eleanor Whitfield. I'm not going to spend year 79 becoming Brittany." His face, God, his face. Relief and shame and love and guilt, all braided together like a rope he didn't know whether to climb or hang from. "Here are my terms. Lily is welcome here any time. You are welcome here when you get a job, when you start showing up like a father and a son instead of a bystander. Brittany is welcome when she apologizes. In person. At this table. To my face. Not a text. Not through you. Here." He nodded. "And Kevin, get a job. Not for Brittany. Not for me. For Lily. For yourself. I'm done being everyone's safety net. The net is retired. The net is 78 and wants to drink her tea in peace." He almost smiled. Almost. It was enough. That afternoon, I took Lily to the backyard. Harold's rose garden. 6 years of neglect, brown canes, cracked soil. The wire supports Harold bent by hand, still standing like small monuments to a man who believed things should grow. I got on my knees. Lily got on hers. I handed her the garden trowel, the green one, Harold's, with the worn handle that fit his palm and now fit mine. "We're going to plant new ones," I said. "Grammy ordered them last week. They're called Mr. Lincoln Harold's favorite. Big red blooms. They smell like the way a rose is supposed to smell, before they started breeding the scent out of everything." Lily dug with the focus of a surgeon and the accuracy of a 6-year-old, which meant dirt ended up in places dirt should never be. I didn't care. Dirt washes. Memories don't. "Grammy, will the flowers come back?" "Everything comes back if you take care of it, sweetheart. You water them every day, even when you're tired, even when it seems like nothing's growing, because one morning you'll come outside and there it is." She patted the soil around the new bush, nodded seriously, like she'd just signed a contract. I looked up. Through the kitchen window, I could see Kevin, standing at the sink, washing dishes. He'd never washed a dish in this house. Not once in 42 years. His sleeves were rolled up. He was doing it wrong too much. Soap. Not enough rinsing. But he was doing it. Small thing. First thing. I turned back to the garden. The October air was cool on my face. The soil was dark and wet. Lily hummed something, a song from her cartoons, tuneless and perfect. "I'm 78 years old. I've buried a husband, fired a daughter-in-law, and made my 42-year-old son cry on the kitchen floor. My back aches. My knees have filed a formal complaint, and I have dirt under my fingernails for the first time in 6 years. But this afternoon, I'm kneeling in Harold's garden with my granddaughter, planting roses that won't bloom until spring. And for the first time since a woman with a laser printer tried to erase me from my own life, 412 Maple Drive smells like home. Not because the locks are new, because the people inside them are trying to be. If you've ever been made to feel like a guest in your own life, in your own home, your own family, your own story, I hope you heard something today that reminded you the deed has your name on it. Whatever your deed is, your house, your dignity, your right to take up space in a world that keeps trying to shrink you. Check it, read it, and don't let anyone, not your son, not your daughter-in-law, not even the ghost of a good man who meant well, tell you it belongs to someone else. It's yours. It always was. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have roses to water and a clock to straighten. It's been crooked since 1979, and I think it's finally time. Thank you for listening. Drop a comment and tell me, would you have changed the locks?